And he came over to the table and he said, "Frank, do me a favor, will you?" He said, "I'm sitting with a very pretty girl. I'm trying to make out, you know." And he said, "I told her I know you and she really doesn't believe me. Would you stop by the table?" I said, "All right." Finally, he went back and I walked by the table and I said, "How are you, Don? Nice to see you." He said, "Can't you see I'm eating, Frank? What do you do?"
There was a time when the voice of Frank Sinatra drifted through late-night radios like a memory too beautiful to disappear. To millions, he sounded fearless, smooth, romantic, untouchable. But behind the tuxedos, the applause, and the flashing Hollywood lights lived a man who spent much of his life searching for something fame could never fully give him: lasting love. He loved many women. Some brought comfort, some brought heartbreak, and one left a wound so deep that even decades later, friends claimed her name could still change the look in his eyes. In the final years of his life, Sinatra rarely spoke openly about regret, but those closest to him believed one woman remained in his heart until the very end. Tonight, we revisit the loves, losses, and hidden emotions behind one of old Hollywood's most unforgettable legends, and the woman he could never truly forget. The loyal girl who loved him before fame. Long before the world knew the name Frank Sinatra, there was a quiet young woman from New Jersey named Nancy Sinatra Sr. She knew him before the screaming fans, before the casinos, before Hollywood transformed him into a symbol of American romance. Back then, Frank was simply an ambitious young singer with restless eyes and impossible dreams. They married in 1939, during years when life still felt ordinary. Nancy believed in stability, family, and loyalty. While Frank chased opportunity, she created a home. Together, they built a life that seemed grounded far away from the glitter of celebrity culture. Soon, they welcomed children, including Nancy Sinatra, who would later become a star herself. But fame changes the atmosphere around a man, especially in old Hollywood. As Sinatra's popularity exploded in the 1940s, women surrounded him everywhere he went. Nightclubs, film sets, hotel lobbies, private parties, temptation became part of his daily existence. Newspapers praised his charm. Women screamed at concerts. America no longer saw him as Nancy's husband. They saw him as a fantasy. And slowly, distance entered the marriage. Nancy remained dignified through the rumors. In many ways, she represented a disappearing kind of devotion. Patient, quiet, deeply traditional. Friends later suggested she hoped Frank would eventually return emotionally to the family life they once shared. But Hollywood rarely gives back the man it creates. Then came another woman. A woman whose beauty and intensity would completely change Sinatra's life forever. The pain of that transition stayed with Nancy for years, yet she rarely spoke publicly with bitterness. That silence became part of her identity. While Frank chased passion and emotional excitement, Nancy preserved something calmer: grace. And perhaps that is why this chapter still feels heartbreaking today. Because before the scandals, before the betrayals, before the unforgettable love story that would define Sinatra forever, there was simply a husband and wife trying to hold on to ordinary happiness while fame slowly pulled them apart. Sometimes the first person to love a star is also the first person forgotten by the spotlight. The woman who set Hollywood on fire. By the time Ava Gardner entered Frank Sinatra's life, Hollywood already viewed them as two of the most magnetic people in America. But no one expected their relationship to become one of the most explosive love stories the entertainment world had ever seen. When they first met in the late 1940s, Sinatra was still married to Nancy Sinatra Sr., yet something about Ava immediately unsettled him. She was not soft-spoken or easily impressed by fame. She carried herself with confidence, independence, and a quiet wildness that made people nervous and fascinated at the same time. Frank fell hard. Friends later described him as emotionally consumed by her. At the same moment his career was beginning to struggle, Ava's film career was rising rapidly. That imbalance affected Sinatra deeply. For perhaps the first time in his life, He feared losing someone more than he feared losing fame itself. Their affair quickly became front-page news. Hollywood photographers followed them everywhere. Reporters described screaming arguments, emotional reconciliations, broken dishes, slammed doors, and nights filled with passion and regret. Yet beneath all the chaos existed something genuine. Even people close to the couple admitted the love between them felt painfully real. Sinatra divorced Nancy and married Ava in 1951. But marriage did not calm the storm. Both were jealous. Both were stubborn. Both carried emotional wounds they rarely spoke about openly. Ava valued freedom. Frank wanted reassurance. Their love became a cycle of closeness and destruction. Sometimes they could not live together peacefully, yet they also struggled to live apart. There were periods when Sinatra appeared emotionally shattered by the relationship. Some friends claimed his heartbreak over Ava pushed him into the darkest emotional moments of his life. He once reportedly said, "She made him feel more alive than anyone else ever had." And perhaps that was the problem, because not every great love arrives gently. Sometimes love arrives like fire, beautiful from a distance, dangerous up close, impossible to fully control. Eventually, the marriage collapsed under the weight of constant emotional tension, and they divorced in 1957. But even after the separation, Ava never truly disappeared from Sinatra's heart. Friends noticed that hearing her name could still change his expression years later. Decades later, many people who knew Sinatra believed one thing remained true. He loved many women in his lifetime, but Ava Gardner was the woman who haunted him forever. And some loves remain unfinished long after the goodbye has already happened. The widow who almost became Mrs. Sinatra. After the emotional destruction of Ava Gardner, Frank Sinatra entered a quieter period of his life. The public still saw confidence. The tuxedos remained flawless. The voice still filled concert halls, but privately, something inside him had changed. The fiery certainty he once carried now seemed mixed with caution. Then tragedy brought him closer to Lauren Bacall. Bacall had recently lost her husband, Humphrey Bogart, one of Hollywood's most respected legends. Grief surrounded her life. Sinatra understood loneliness better than most people realized, and the two slowly formed a deep emotional connection built not on excitement, but understanding. Their relationship surprised Hollywood. Unlike Ava Gardner, Bacall represented maturity, intelligence, and emotional steadiness. She did not seem interested in chaos or dramatic games. Friends described their bond as warm, respectful, and comforting. For a moment, many believed Sinatra had finally found the kind of relationship capable of bringing lasting peace into his life. In 1958, they quietly became engaged. But old Hollywood had a habit of turning private emotions into public spectacle. When news of the engagement leaked to the press, Sinatra reportedly became furious. Some believed he felt betrayed by the publicity itself. Others suggested the deeper truth was more painful. Frank feared commitment after the emotional collapse of his marriage to Ava Gardner. The closer relationships became, the more he seemed to retreat emotionally. Without warning, Sinatra ended the engagement. The decision deeply hurt Bacall. Years later, she still spoke about the heartbreak with visible sadness. To her, the relationship had felt sincere, stable, real. But Sinatra's emotional scars were complicated, and perhaps he no longer trusted happiness enough to fully hold on to it. For older Hollywood fans, this chapter often feels especially tragic because there was no explosive scandal, no dramatic betrayal. Just two wounded adults trying to find companionship after pain had already shaped them both. And maybe that is why it still lingers emotionally decades later. Because sometimes the saddest relationships are not destroyed by hatred. They disappear quietly, from fear. Bacall eventually moved forward with dignity, while Sinatra continued searching for emotional balance in a world that rarely allowed him to feel fully at peace. Yet, even as new romances entered his life, Many close to Sinatra noticed something difficult to ignore. No relationship after Ava Gardner ever seemed to reach his soul in quite the same way. Some people lose love because of conflict. Others lose it because they no longer know how to trust calmness when it finally arrives. The young star who entered Sinatra's final golden years. In the mid-1960s, Hollywood could hardly believe the headlines. Frank Sinatra, the symbol of old-school American glamour, had fallen in love with a woman nearly 30 years younger than him, Mia Farrow. To the public, the relationship felt unexpected. Sinatra belonged to the smoky nightclub era, the world of tuxedos and big band orchestras. Mia represented something entirely different. The younger, changing Hollywood of the 1960s. She appeared delicate, modern, almost fragile beside Sinatra's commanding presence. But perhaps that contrast attracted him. By this stage of life, Sinatra had already experienced emotional highs and devastating heartbreaks. The intense storm of Ava Gardner was long behind him. The quiet disappointment of Lauren Bacall had faded into memory. With Mia, he seemed to reach for something softer, a chance to feel youthful again in a rapidly changing world. They married in 1966. At first, their relationship fascinated the media. Photographers captured them smiling together in restaurants, airports, and film premieres. Yet beneath the glamour, differences slowly began to grow. Mia still wanted to build her own career. Sinatra, shaped by an older generation, valued traditional loyalty and closeness in marriage. Those expectations eventually collided when Farrow accepted a major role in Rosemary's Baby. According to many accounts, Sinatra wanted her to step away from the production and prioritize their marriage. Mia refused. The conflict exposed something deeper about Sinatra himself. Beneath the confidence and charm was a man who often feared emotional distance. When relationships no longer moved according to the emotional structure he understood, insecurity quietly entered the picture. In 1968, Sinatra famously sent divorce papers to Mia while she was still filming. The image became symbolic of old Hollywood colliding with a new era. And yet, despite the pain of the separation, Mia Farrow rarely spoke about Sinatra with bitterness. In later interviews, she often described him with warmth and affection. Their relationship may not have survived, but some emotional bond clearly remained. For Sinatra, however, the marriage represented another reminder that time changes everything. Careers, romance, expectations, even the meaning of love itself. The world around him was evolving faster than he wanted to admit. And perhaps, somewhere deep inside, he still searched for the kind of overwhelming connection he once felt years earlier with Ava Gardner. A love that destroyed him emotionally, yet never fully released him. Because some memories quietly follow a person through every chapter of life, even when the world believes they have already moved on. And sometimes growing older means realizing that certain hearts never completely heal. They simply learn how to hide the pain more gracefully. The women behind the rumors, temptations, and midnight affairs. By the 1950s and 1960s, Frank Sinatra was no longer simply a performer. He had become a symbol of masculine charm in American culture. Nightclubs stopped when he entered. Casino owners treated him like royalty. Women across Hollywood were drawn to his confidence, mystery, and emotional intensity. And with that fame came endless rumors. Over the years, Sinatra's name became linked to some of the most glamorous women of the century. Among them was Marilyn Monroe. Their friendship created fascination inside Hollywood circles for years. Some believed their connection was romantic, while others insisted they were simply emotionally close companions who understood the pressure of fame and loneliness. Then there was Judy Garland, another legendary performer whose emotional struggles mirrored Sinatra's own hidden vulnerabilities. Both understood what it meant to live under relentless public attention while privately battling sadness and exhaustion. Sinatra was also connected to Angie Dickinson, whose elegance and confidence matched the sophisticated world Sinatra loved to inhabit. Their relationship reportedly carried warmth and affection, though it never fully became a lasting commitment. Another important figure was Juliet Prowse. Their romance appeared serious for a time, and some people believed marriage was possible. Yet once again, Sinatra's complicated emotional patterns seemed to prevent stability from lasting. But something deeper connected many of these relationships. The women surrounding Sinatra were often strong, talented, emotionally complex individuals carrying wounds of their own. Beneath the public image of confidence, Sinatra himself struggled with loneliness more than audiences realized. Friends frequently described him as deeply sensitive, easily hurt, and hungry for emotional reassurance despite his powerful public image. That contradiction shaped much of his romantic life. He could command an entire concert hall with confidence, yet privately fear abandonment from the woman he loved. As years passed, Hollywood gossip exaggerated many stories around Sinatra. Some affairs were likely real, others became larger through tabloid culture. But the larger truth remained clear. Sinatra spent much of his life searching for emotional connection, while fame constantly complicated the search itself. And perhaps that is why older audiences still feel drawn to his story today. Not because he lived perfectly, but because beneath the glamour, he often seemed like a man chasing peace he could never fully hold on to. Through every romance, every nightclub, every whispered rumor, one emotional shadow quietly remained behind all the others. The memory of Ava Gardner. Because sometimes a single great love silently echoes through every relationship that follows afterward. The woman he could never forget. By the time Barbara Sinatra entered the life of Frank Sinatra, the chaos of old Hollywood had already begun to fade. The wild nights were quieter now. Many of the legends he once stood beside were gone. Age had softened certain parts of him, though the emotional weight of his past never completely disappeared. Barbara brought something different into Sinatra's world. Not chaos, not emotional warfare, not painful uncertainty. Peace. They married in 1976 and remained together for the rest of his life. To the public, Barbara became the loyal companion who protected Sinatra during his later years. She organized their social world, cared for his well-being, and stood beside him as his health slowly declined. Friends often described her as stabilizing, someone who understood the emotional complexity of the man behind the legendary image. And Sinatra genuinely loved her. But even Barbara herself later seemed to understand one difficult truth. Part of Frank Sinatra's heart still belonged to the past. More specifically, to Ava Gardner. People close to Sinatra claimed that Ava's name still carried emotional power over him decades after their divorce. Old memories lingered quietly inside him. Certain songs reminded him of her. Certain conversations reportedly changed his mood. Even after years had passed, the emotional wound never fully disappeared. That does not mean he failed to value Barbara. In many ways, Barbara gave Sinatra something equally meaningful: loyalty, calmness, dignity, and companionship during the final chapter of life. She stayed beside him when the applause became softer and the world moved on to younger stars. But deep love and peaceful love are not always the same thing. And Sinatra's life seemed to prove that painfully. Toward the end, the image of Frank Sinatra became less about celebrity glamour and more about memory itself. A man sitting quietly with decades of victories, regrets, heartbreaks, and unfinished emotions living inside him all at once. He loved many women throughout his extraordinary life. Some admired him, some comforted him, some challenged him. But according to countless friends, historians, and people who truly knew him, only one woman left a permanent mark on his soul: Ava Gardner. And perhaps that is the saddest truth hidden behind old Hollywood romance. Sometimes the greatest love story is not the one that lasts forever, but the one a person never fully escapes. In the silence of old age, the heart often remembers exactly who changed it forever. Today, the music of Frank Sinatra still plays across quiet living rooms, late-night radios, and memories that refuse to fade. But behind that unforgettable voice was a man whose search for love often brought both beauty and heartbreak. His story reminds us that fame cannot protect anyone from loneliness, regret, or longing. And sometimes, the love that shapes a life is not the one that survives, but the one that leaves a permanent scar on the heart. If you enjoyed this journey through old Hollywood's hidden emotions and timeless stories, be sure to subscribe. Leave a comment sharing which chapter touched you most. And join us again for another unforgettable story from the golden age of cinema.